Welcome to the Business of Property podcast. I'm Stuart.
And I'm Simon.
We're both property people running our own businesses, and this podcast is just us chatting about the reality of anything and everything property.
And don't worry, you haven't accidentally downloaded an episode from 18 months ago. This is the return of Stuart for just one episode, a very, very special episode where we're going to catch up on what Stuart has been doing since the 3rd of April, 2024, I should say. Episode 227 was the last episode that Stuart co-hosted this podcast with me on, and a lot has happened since then. For everybody, of course, it's over a year, and a lot has happened in Stuart's property business, and we're going to dig into some of that, at least, in this episode. Not least the fact that he has returned to full-time property business work since March this year. So it's quite a transformation, I think, in Stuart's life there. But before we get into that sort of business change and life change for Stuart, long-term listeners, I should say, might remember that there was a particularly troublesome flat that Stuart has in his portfolio that was intended, I think, to be a 6-month flip. Was it, Stuart?
Yeah, 6 months was the target timeline. Yeah.
Okay, so this is a flat in Croydon, referred to as the Croydon Flat, and it was intended to be a 6-month flip some years ago now. And Stuart, have you sold it yet?
No. Yeah. The flat was bought in October 2019. We still own that flat as of this recording, so it's virtually 6 years old now. Has cost us a lot of money. Still doesn't make money, just for the record.
Oh no!
I mean, it's not even like we break even, but it is currently rented, so that is some recompense. It's not all bad.
Yep.
And it is on the market, but we are finding that particular part of the market quite tough at the moment. But thanks for bringing it up. It's always a good place to start with my worst investment ever.
Well, I'm sure actually it's a brilliant investment, and we'll include a link to it in the show notes if anyone wants to go and buy it.
Yeah, absolutely. Please do contact me. It was. I always put it down in the learnings column. If you don't earn, you learn, and I am still learning from that property.
So you say it's proving a difficult market at the moment. Is it just because it's a flat, which I've heard lots of people say are a bit tricky to sell at the moment, or is there more to the reason you think that's difficult at the minute?
It's certainly difficult in this area. So it's in Croydon, East Croydon, which pretty much soon after we bought it had the external wall survey issue, which I'm not going to get into again, but that precluded any standard banks lending on it. And at the same time, at least 2 or 3 blocks of flats went up, which are really nice flats with facilities, gyms, swimming pools, that kind of thing, none of which our block has, as well as an excruciating service charge. So it's in a highly competitive area that's now saturated with those flats. So, it was a perfect storm of crapness, to be honest, for us, which the learnings itself were, because it was a new area for me, we should have done a little bit more. I mean, I don't think we could have foreseen the external wall survey issue, because it kind of happened around the time we bought and it kind of just blew up. But we probably should have had more eyes on the local market itself. But I do believe that it will come out in the end, and we will sell it at some stage. It's back on like I say, it's been back on the market, but we've had zero interest. I was just having a bit of a punt. It does have a tenant in there, a good tenant in there at the moment, and it is a nice flat. We took it from a 1-bed to a 2/3. 5 minutes walk from East Croydon station, which means it's 20 minutes from central London. So it's great next to tram. So it's a good property. It's just we're going to have to
Yeah. Just
wait.
got to wait for the right buyer.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, exactly.
All right. Well, having started on a low note, let's now talk about your full time property business. And just before we do, I assume you're now working in your home office a lot at the moment. And behind me, I've got a really boring wall in the office I work in. And behind you, you've got a really good picture. And your office there is looking very professional. Do you is that where you work now every day?
90% of the time at the moment, so I still do have a co-working option. But it's interesting. Once I've got everything set up at home, I have a team member, and she actually now comes and meets me here, and we sit at this desk and we have our meetings, and then it just gets more comfortable. I've got a really nice view out of the window. But thanks for picking up on the image, because this is a bone of contention between my wife and I, because I put this up myself. It's vinyl, and for those that are watching this on YouTube, yes, please do notice the gap between the ceiling and the image, because that was the first thing my wife noticed. And we don't fall out often. We've been together over 20 years, married for around 18, 19. But this is the first time she didn't talk to me for a very long period of time, because we hadn't done any of the house up. And then just one day when she was away for a weekend, I thought, I'm just going to sort to study out. And I did this thinking it was okay. My wife, not as happy as I was about the situation.
Well, I think it looks great. And
Thank you.
where you say it doesn't quite fit, it's never going to fit. Walls, ceilings, they're not straight ever.
Yeah. Well,
So,
I shall play this recording to my other half so that she can hear it come from someone else's mouth. Because when I put that to her, it was, yeah, what it wasn't taken as a reasonable argument.
well, let's comment no more on that then. I think the picture's great, and I think your office looks very professional. And you're now there 90% of the time, you say. So what is it you're doing? Where are you? Why are you back in property full time? And how is that working?
Yeah, it was always the intention to be able to focus on the business. As always, other opportunities come up, and I think my challenge, as with many of us, has always been, particularly those of us that start businesses, is that we always go into the next thing that looks more interesting, when actually just focusing on the bread and butter of whatever it is your business's core product is the main thing. And so for me, so the business is made up of properties that we own, so company owned properties, and also properties that we lease. So a lot of people in property will know it as rent to rent. However, for me, it's now moved into guaranteed rent model, which, and I'm trying to align with the bigger companies that do this, like companies like Northwood and other big organizations, because rent to rent, the only challenge I have with that terminology itself is that there are a lot of smaller companies stroke people doing it without having professionalized and doing it. I'm very proud that my company has never missed a payment, never been late for a payment. And, we are, fully certified. We're part of the property redress scheme, etc. So part of my job is really finding new landlords, new property owners. And essentially that's what I've been doing for the last 6 months. So working on new projects. We've got, so for example, we don't just take on property owners with one property. I've got property owners with 5 properties. I'm talking to someone with 10 plus, 50 rooms. As a company, we will be managing over around 125 rooms. So, as you know, that's not
Yeah.
insignificant.
No, right.
Just the maintenance itself is a job to manage that, for which we are very grateful for Patma for, because that handles a lot of that for us and preempts the certification. And so really the job is about marketing, getting new customers on board, and really I don't want to be a letting agent per se, but I think, more and more as time's passed, I've realized, well, that's kind of how I've got to act, because that kind of is what we are. It just, we don't offer the standard, 15% agency fee model. We offer the model where we will just guarantee the rent for 3, 5, 7+ years. And so really it's just fleshing that out and really just getting the business to be profitable. That is priority number one.
Yeah. I re-listened to our last episode 227 in preparation for today, and you were mentioning that that drive to business profitability in that episode as well. so yeah, I think it's what we all need and all want as business owners, isn't it? To be running a stable, profitable business that's growing. That you mentioned finding new landlords and things, and I know sort of rent to rent is a popular strategy. So I think lots of people will be curious about how do you do that? What does that actually involve?
Well, it's involved really in a number of ways that people will be aware of and some not, but standard marketing techniques. So I would say stop and think about, if anyone's rented a company with with a letting agent, think about, how did you find that letting agent? It's probably a letter through the door, leaflet through the door, less and less walking down the high street. Um, Particularly in my area of HMO, it's, can I find contact details that we're allowed to use? There might be an HMO licensing database, which you may or may not be able to use depending on which council you're in. So I'm not going to get into that, but we would use that. Also looking at Facebook, so Facebook advertising. We've looked a little bit at Google, but for me, there weren't enough people necessarily looking for that on Google, because I don't think it's a standard search term really.
No.
But Facebook, I think, is interesting to me. But I'm really following this model, which is okay. Let's use direct mail leafleting, because that's what's worked for us so far, and we're not at the stage where we will have saturated that market, not by a long chalk. So, because it's very easy, as you know, when you're a business owner, again, shiny penny syndrome. It's like, okay, well, I'm doing this one activity. That's where my previous customers have come from. But oh, look over there, someone's doing something on TikTok or whatever the next social media channel is. Why don't we do some of that? When actually we haven't fully. There's one phrase, and I've probably mentioned this on one of our podcasts. There's a book called The One Thing, which is one of my favourite personal development, business development books. And one of the things that always stuck with me there, it says, as a business owner, are you willing to endure the monotony of success? And what that means to me is exactly what it is. You go through this stage where you just feel like you're grinding out the same things day after day after day. But that is where the success is. So probably a long way round of answering your question, but we are kind of sticking to direct mail, stroke door drops, do a little bit of outbound. And because we've been going for 9 years, we've developed a good relationship with letting agents as well. So they have passed on more than a couple of landlords to us, where landlords didn't want the standard model. Because again, it's one of those questions people say, well, why would people give you the property for guaranteed rent for less money? And I said, well, there's always a baked in assumption there that it is less money. And actually, as you and I discussed briefly before the call, is that when I look at the amount of energy increases that my company has absorbed on behalf of the landlord, I'm not sure they do make less money. We've absorbed the labour costs, the material costs, and everything else, and rents haven't gone up in line with that. So actually, the homeowner, the landlord, or the superior landlord, if we're going to be really technical about it, just has a consistent profit every single month, and we cover everything else. So so we're kind of just trying to follow that line, really.
Yeah, exactly. There's a lot more in terms of costs and all sorts of other things as well that go into running an HMO than just the rent. the rent is actually probably the biggest single number, but there's a lot of other bits and pieces that are involved. I wonder if perhaps it might be worth actually giving a bit of an idea to people how many different things you do juggle in your business, because you don't tend to do the sort of actual letting side of it, as in you have letting agents. But I should add, actually, you do this remotely. So your investment area is in Plymouth, I believe. Mm-hmm. Hopefully I've remembered that correctly. So and you're based in the sort of Gatwick area. So that's obviously quite remote. So you use letting agents for the day-to-day tenant facing bits. but then you do all the other stuff, really, I think. So, yeah, what is it that is also involved in that day-to-day juggle?
Starts with maintenance. As anyone in property will know, it starts with maintenance, and we do that. So there is a single email address that tenants will email. That will come through to my company, my team, so someone that works for my company directly, and will get triaged. And when you're running 100 plus rooms, that's a daily occurrence, needless to say. So there's a lot of maintenance. We have direct relationships with all of the suppliers, the tradespeople, whether that's electrician, plumber, general maintenance, cleaning, a lot of that. Just general stuff. So we'll be managing that and working closely with the agents about what's happening in the market. So I see it like really simply is, for at the highest level, the business is, it's about the income and the level of costs. So my focus as the business owner is to make sure, is our income at the highest level it can be for the occupancy. So my target occupancy rate is always 98% plus. And, we'll dip below that as it always can. So when that happens, I need to understand why, and that usually means we haven't stayed on top of maintenance. And then it's the cost base. So what I spend a lot of time focusing on is maintenance. So that's why we brought that in-house, so that we could have more of a control on that, and we're not paying additional fees. And also energy costs, mentioned that as well. In the last, between 2020 and 2024, energy costs increased 140%. So did we do enough to mitigate that increase? No. And, we use a third party company for that, but we didn't stay on top of them. And, it turns out we were probably spending more than £1,500 a month than we should have been on energy costs, just because we took our eye off the ball. Yeah, really, really painful. So we're talking, 12 to £18,000 a year straight off my bottom line because we hadn't paid attention. And that's, as unsexy as it sounds, that is really what I had to be focused on as a business owner that wasn't, because I like working on new, like most business owners. Give me new and I'm happy with that. Through untold amounts of pain, I've now realized, no, I've got to stop that now and just, focus on dealing with what the most important things are. So that really at the highest level is where it's at. As well as all of the other sort of daily admin, where are our mortgages, what are the rates, contract renewals. So we've had a couple of contract renewals with our existing landlord portfolio. So even on a 5-year contract, they're coming up thick and fast, and then it's just renegotiating that, having conversations. And I'm currently speaking with someone that owns a portfolio of over 50 rooms. So that's a lot of backwards and forwards because they don't want risk, I don't want risk. And a little story I can tell you on that. So one of the properties we signed up within the last 2 years was a small property, I'll say, with so under, let's just say under 10 rooms. We inherited a couple of tenants. Now, what we didn't know at the time was that those tenants were bad tenants that were intermittent payers. This is me being super polite, but when my contract got signed, they decided they wouldn't pay anymore because they didn't fancy it. And it took us 12 months plus to get them out of the property, and that's 12 months where my company still had to pay the rent on time every month, because if I didn't do that, I wouldn't be much of a business. Still paid for their gas, electric, water, broadband, TV license, and council tax, and also covered all of the costs to get these people out of the building who still haven't paid. And we're now talking over £13,000 in terms of unpaid rent. So lost a lot of money on that property, which I sometimes think makes me a really bad businessman, because someone said to me, Stuart, you should just hand back those keys. And I said, yeah, I know, but I signed a contract and I shook someone's hand, and I just don't feel that that's the way I want to deal with it. And I'm glad, because that owner now has just renewed an HMO license and just said to me, Stuart, because of how you handled that thing, I just want you to have this property now for another 5 years. We don't even need to discuss it. and for me that made it all worthwhile. And the fact that I attended court on behalf, because the reason I sort of got into what I did was because I had experienced some of what these owners experience, and these owners, without going into their personal details, just they're people that are older, they're more, let's say, closer to retirement. They don't want to worry about property. They don't want to worry about tenants. And the fact that I would turn up to court on their behalf and deal with all of that, for them and me was priceless. Knowing that I'd taken that weight off. When I looked at my P&L at the end of them every month, I wasn't happy. But when I stood next to them, I had phone calls. I was very happy that I was able to give them peace of mind, and that is kind of almost reinvigorated me in doing what I do. It's like, okay, this is why I do it, because I want to make these people happy, but I do need to make some money along the way.
Yeah, as much as I'm sorry for extending the remembering of this, but I'm always a bit curious. How was that day in court? What was involved in that process? Did it go well?
So we had 2 days in court for each separately for each tenant. One of them had tried to negotiate. Now, this is funny. So, trying to think of ways to word this without giving too much detail.
Yeah, of course.
But because we are still in the case of collection. So, but let's just say one tenant owed more than a few £1,000s, another several thousands. So the first one turned up and we hadn't heard anything, no contact whatsoever. Then on the day of the court case, the tenant turned up. They had a session with shelter who were provided on their behalf, all as it should be, but clearly had a lot of support. And then the person from shelter came out and said, okay, they're offering to pay you something like, let's just say £20 a month. And I said that would mean repaying the debt in 9.2 years. And with all due respect, I don't have that much time to think about this. So that's a no. And then that went to court, and basically we just got the county court judgment against that. The second person we weren't sure was going to turn up. He did turn up right at the last minute, and kind of didn't realise it, but shot themselves in the foot, because on their form, which was supposed to be filled out before the day in court, clearly did it on the day, possibly with some assistance, although that wasn't recognised. But we were quite sure that they hadn't written the things themselves. But what was quite interesting was, and for me, this is where my confidence was given, because sometimes the burden seems so much on us as landlords now. You worry that it's all going to go against you. But in the courtroom, the magistrate was given the paperwork from the tenant, who said, because they tried to, well, it wasn't even a counterclaim, but they tried a claim of it was a repair claim, which basically says that the property wasn't in good enough condition for them to pay the rent that they had never paid. But even though I had asked them on numerous occasions to leave and would have let them leave, they said no. So, again, we're in this wonderful, ironic world where they're saying the property's not good enough to live in, but we won't leave. But the magistrate, in very legal terms, said, look, you might have a claim in terms of repair, but I don't believe you have. If you'd like to try and claim it, you can do that elsewhere. But other than that, you just need to pay your bills. And obviously that person, well, I say obviously they were going to hang around, but they left. And so now it's just been left for us. So I think once it got to court, I mean, that's the tough bit, getting to court, getting the paperwork done, because if an I isn't dotted or a T not crossed, it will get thrown out of court. That for me, I believe, is the challenge, particularly in these. Fortunately, the magistrate saw straight through the situation, but there is enough wiggle room now, I believe, for bad tenants, of whom there are few. And it was a tough one because, like I say, I mean that the money that we hadn't been paid was significant, and was quite detrimental to my business. The way I kind of got through it, because my wife's like, I don't know how you're sleeping at night. And I just said, look, I accept that this is part of business. This is part of what we do. And the other thing that gets me through is, like, in terms of overall percentages of our tenant base, it's still low. It's too high, but it's still low compared to it. And I have to accept that that's the game we're in. And if I don't like that, that's on me, so.
Yeah. Oh well, it sounds like it did work out. So it took a while, but we got there.
It worked out in the sense that we got the rooms back, and I think that's, that for me was always priority number one.
Yeah.
And then I've had to invest in trying to reclaim those rents, which I have done, and that's going to be ongoing now for the foreseeable. But for me, it became about principle.
Yeah. Yeah. I seem to recall that you had a mix of student rooms and young professional rooms, and I think you were erring more towards favouring the young professionals sort of going forwards. How is that mix looking in your portfolio these days, and how are you feeling about those two?
Yeah, it is. It's changed dramatically because so I used to say we used to probably have a third student and then two-thirds workers, which again was an increase, and that happened during COVID because we just started changing the rooms from student to, because we just weren't sure what was going to happen with the student population at the time of COVID. And fun enough, so I'd say then we've gone down to around a tenth is student, and as of this coming September, it's probably going to be, well, almost zero, because I think we're moving to graduate. And the reasons are a couple of fold. One is, one of the big challenges for my business in terms of cash flow was students pay 3 times a year. Now,
Mm.
simple brain just says, well, but you just take that payment in September and then you amortize it going forwards. But I think most people would understand that in property land, you're always going from the back, because you've got maintenance and issues that need to be paid for ongoing. So until you've created that pot of cash, it's a kind of a pipe dream for us. So for us to move to graduate means that they'll now pay monthly, which for me will help massively in terms of ongoing cash flow. So yeah, virtually none. I'm actually in the process, touch wood, of selling a 2-bed student property just to release some funds, and then I've got the 13-bed, which is an interesting one. I'll share it with you at some stage. But we're going to paint Salvador Dali on the front of it, and it's a very interesting looking building. But you'll like it with your with your curiosity. It's quite powerful. But that one is going to move to graduate as well. So yeah, we're probably going to be virtually non-student after September.
Wow, I think that's very interesting. Is that happening in the wider market in Plymouth? Is it sort of moving more towards PBSA or or not?
Yeah, it's definitely moved towards PBSA because quite a few developments went up. I haven't analysed it much recently, to be fair, because we've just been focused on delivering what we've got. But what I do know is that landlords are selling up. Obviously, renters' rights bill. Not going to get into that, but that's caused a lot of people to question whether they want to continue. And I think we're seeing this kind of like polarization of either people are in or out now. They're not changing things. It's like, I'm just out. I could
Mm.
go from student to workers or whatever, and I'm seeing less of that, and I'm seeing more people sell just based. This is anecdotally, not data based. But what I do know is that the student numbers had gone down year after year in Plymouth. I think that's stabilised now, but I still think it's a challenging market. And I think some of the conversations which we'll have had before probably hold true, which is, once a property's condition has lowered, it's very hard for landlords to get back at that unless they reinvest significant sums, because with PBSA comes quality, and that means there's always going to be a market for private, or in my opinion, and that's for numerous reasons. But because of PBSA and what first year students are used to, that means they're going to want higher quality. But don't we all? So and that's the thing. So what I've seen in my experience in Plymouth is just that the area within which the HMOs are operating is just shrinking more and more, because people want to live less on the edges, and typically those properties haven't been cared for enough or maintained well enough for them to stay in it. So
Mm. Very, very interesting. I should also apologise for introducing an acronym without saying what it meant. So PBSA is, of course, purpose-built student accommodation. But let's move on a bit. And I'm sure everyone listening is thinking that you've started or you've returned to full-time property business back in March. And we've only talked about a couple of simple things that probably haven't been taking very long and haven't been filling your days much. So we should explain what else you've been doing in your time, because I happen to know you've been doing some writing. So
Yeah.
what's this all about?
Well, as part of what I do, I mean, I often think about, and following our conversations as part of the podcast and just our offline conversations is about like why HMOs don't make money. And obviously I'm helping landlords. So I have written an ebook. It's titled The 5 Reasons Most HMOs Don't Make a Profit. And is based on the 5 reasons I think that most HMOs don't make a profit, strangely enough. And it's as of this recording, literally just been finished and re-edited. And I mean, I say re-edited. It's a 30-something page ebook, which not only outlines the problems, but what I believe are the solutions to those problems and how HMO landlords can address them. And I actually really enjoyed writing it and doing some of the research for it, and some of that research has just informed some of this discussion really in terms of one of the things that we've talked about, which I think isn't talked about enough publicly, is just the amount of costs that us as landlords have absorbed in the last 5 years, and I'm sure people will say last 20 years, but certainly in the last 5 years, when we look at the cost of labour, the cost of materials, the cost of energy, cost of mortgages, which, okay, is now in a negative year-on-year situation. But, in that 5 years, by my calculations, the research that I've put in this book, we have taken on about 300% increase. So our costs have increased threefold, as well as inflation. Yet I'm pretty sure if we did a quick straw poll of us two and anyone that listening to and watching this podcast, none of us has tripled our rents. I'll be very confident.
Definitely not.
No, because I don't, you'd have gone for the, Versace wallpaper instead of the plain background. And it's that kind of thing, which is, okay, so we can't triple the rents, and there's no suggestion in my book that we would. But we haven't done that for reasons. Yeah, so my ebook outlines those kind of things and what we can do to address that.
And I've had a very, very quick sneak preview, so I'm looking forward to having a proper read of it soon, hopefully. And I think you're giving this away for free, aren't you? So where can people find it if they want? Because it should be available by the time anyone is listening to this. So
it will be available. I guarantee it will be available by the time this podcast is released. All you need to do is just head to my website, which is lordpandaproperty.co.uk. And there'll be a big button on the front there that says HMO book. Just click on there. And the only cost to anybody will just be to enter their details and email address, and they will get a copy of this ebook. And I would love it if people did and fed back to either you or me their thoughts, because I'm quite happy to develop it and I'd really love the feedback. So that's a genuine plea. If anybody does download this book, to please give me the feedback. And I do mean that, both good and bad, because I'd love to sort of build on it and maybe build it out to a bigger book that helps other landlords, specifically HMOs landlords, but anyone really.
Just to sort of reinforce where people can find it, links will be in the show notes to this podcast episode as well. And if you'd like to give feedback to Stuart, there will be links to sort of him, if you like, in the show notes as well. And in fact, I happen to know that his email address is in the ebook as well. So go get the ebook, download it, and then you can find his email address in there to contact Stuart directly. Now, we do need to bring this episode to a bit of an end, as much as I'm enjoying catching up with you, Stuart, after a long time. Well, not just off the microphones, but also we haven't actually caught up personally for ages, so this has been really good. But I would just quite like to finish up with something that you mentioned in episode 227 as one of the 5 things you've learned running your property business, and just to ask if there's an update at all on it. And this was you to, well, the thing that you mentioned was that in your experience at that point, projects never run on time or to budget in property. Maybe in the wider world, actually, but you were talking about property. So in the last 18 months or so, since you said that, has a project managed to run on time or on budget in your property business?
Would you like the short answer? The short answer is, of course, no. That has not happened. In fact, I can think of several instances where the costs have only increased and timing's only taken longer. Does that mean that I'm not learning? Probably not. But yeah, we've done a number of projects where we've had to refurb, fit out for HMO licensing, and I can categorically say that the costs were all coming in at higher, even though we did add some margin in and took longer. So yeah, it's a short answer. No, we still haven't experienced that.
Maybe one day. One day.
And if I do, you'll be the first to know. We can launch that podcast ASAP.
Fantastic. Is there anything else you'd like to mention, or anything that you want to share with people before we finish up?
No, I'm just very grateful to be invited back on the show, Simon. Do enjoy these conversations, and I do hope they prove useful to anyone listening, just in terms of at least knowing you're not alone. That this is a tough environment, and it's a tough sector, but we're still here, we're still kicking, and we're still doing it. So thanks for inviting me on to be able to talk about it.
Well, I'm very, very pleased you are still here and you are still kicking, and your property business is still going and growing. And thank you very, very much for coming back onto the Business of Property podcast and sharing your updates with us. I hope that I haven't checked with you already, but I hope that you might come back again, perhaps a bit sooner than 18 months.
I hope so.
And we can get another update, because that'd be fantastic.
Absolutely.
Cool. So yeah, thank you very much. And to everyone listening, I will speak to you again next time.